Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. Have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. A lot to get to this morning. So we have more indications about how Israel might respond to those Iranian attacks. We'll break that down. We're also taking a look at survivors of Hurricane Helene who are speaking out now, and also what it's going to take to rebuild in that area, if it's even really possible. So we'll show you some extraordinary video from there. We also have the polls post-debate about who the people thought won. It's kind of interesting. So we'll get into that. We'll also show you what the polls are saying in general about the state of the race and some troubling indicators on the Kamala Harris side about the direction that working class voters are going in. We're also going to take a look at quite an interview. Ta-Nehisi Coates, who was, of course, very much celebrated for his anti-racist work. Now, when he's speaking out about Israeli atrocities and apartheid, very different reception from the mainstream press. Quite an interview that we'll break down for you. And we're also going to be joined this morning by Dr. Jill Stein, of course, Green Party nominee for president, candidate for president, about how she feels about the state of the race and also some extraordinary efforts being undertaken by the Democratic Party to keep her off the ballot in Nevada in particular.
That's
so
right. We're excited.
A lot to get to this morning.
We're very excited to talk to her. Before we get to that, we've got a discount going on right now you want to take advantage of. Let's put that on the screen. BP 2024 at breakingpoints.com for $15 off our premium memberships. You get exclusive access to some of our election content, but you also get to support the show and participate in our exclusive AMAs that happen weekly. So go ahead and take advantage of that. But with that, let's of course get to the major news coming out of Israel, Iran, the United States, what a potential response could look like, and literally could happen tonight, could happen within a week. Nobody really knows right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Let's put this up on the screen. So, of course, we covered extensively on debate night exactly how we got to this place of, really standing on the brink of a massive regional war that the U.S. would undoubtedly get pulled into. The latest indications of Israel, they're saying they're mulling attacks on Iranian oil rigs, nuclear sites, as well, in response to missile attack. That would be, an extraordinary provocation. Let me just read from this article. This was mostly reported out by Axios and is rewritten up here in Times of Israel. Israel may respond to Iran's major Tuesday ballistic missile attack by striking strategic infrastructure such as gas or oil rigs. That would obviously be devastating to the Iranian economy, or by directly targeting Iran's nuclear sites, media reports said on Wednesday, citing Israeli officials. Targeted assassinations and attacks on Iran's air defense systems are also possible responses. The absence, they write, of a more specific decision was in part out of a desire to coordinate any plans with the U.S., the report said, adding that Bibi was expected to speak with Joe Biden as soon as Wednesday afternoon. Quote, "We have a big question mark about how the Iranians are going to respond to an attack, but we take into consideration the possibility they would go all in, which will be a whole different ballgame." The U.S. on Wednesday signaling a willingness to support Israel in a potential response, with the White House promising, quote, "severe consequences for the attack," and saying it will work with Israel to make that the case. In a sign of just how hawkish the Israeli public is, sort of across the board, from the Netanyahu government as well as some of the opposition figures, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett took to cable news to indicate now is the time to attack Iran's oil and nuclear sites, saying it would be a gift of the Israeli people, the Jewish people, to the Iranian people to help foment regime change in that state. Let's take a listen exactly to what he had to say.
Arms that were sort of defending it, or they were its insurance policy against an Israeli strike, and that's Hezbollah and Hamas. But those two arms are temporarily paralyzed. So it's like a boxer out in the ring without arms for the next few minutes. Now is the time that we can attack, because Iran is fully vulnerable. The Islamic Republic of Iran, it's time to hit, destroy the nuclear program, and finally allow the Iranian people to rise up, the amazing Iranian people who have the worst regime, one of the worst regimes on earth. This is the time, this would be the gift of the Israeli people, the Jewish people, to the Iranian people.
I just want to be precise, Prime Minister. You want Israeli airstrikes to blow up Iran's nuclear facilities and its energy facilities, all the oil wells and the oil-related industry that is the main part of the Iranian economy.
That's correct.
Quite extraordinary comments
Okay.
there. I mean, as a note, I think it is actually anti-Semitic to conflate the entire Jewish people with this very belligerent foreign policy. It's also quite extraordinary to frame it as a gift to the Iranian people, striking their strategic oil and nuclear sites. But that is the type of tone and rhetoric that's coming out of the Israelis.
You know what? If you want to give them that gift, you're welcome to give it to them all by yourself. But we all know that that's not going to happen. You know, I recently just came across a fantastic military analyst just put this out. The number of missiles that we fired on a couple of days ago to defend Israel was 12. So roughly all of those allegedly made contact. That is the amount of missiles it takes an entire year for U.S. facilities to crank out. So we invested an entire year's worth of missile production in a single night to defend Israel. Now imagine this times 50, times 100. This is part of why I'm so afraid here, is because the U.S. is greenlighting these strikes potentially on nuclear sites or on energy and oil facilities. The oil facilities may actually be more dangerous because the current analysis that's coming out of CENTCOM and others is that the likely Iranian response will not be to retaliate just against Israel, but will be specifically to retaliate against U.S. and Western oil refineries and oil tankers in the region, which would, of course, immediately draw the United States into this war. And this is the problem I've had from the very beginning, is that it is clear as day now that the Arrow 3 system did not perform all that well, which we will show you in terms of Israel's own battle defense assessments of their ability for the Iranians to hit military targets. And then on top of that, the only reason that the majority of the missiles were intercepted was because of the United States naval destroyers. So when we combine that whole picture, it is clear that if Israel actually had to bear 100% cost of its own actions, like in the first time in April after it destroyed that Iranian embassy, and this time around, that they would never be in a position where a tiny nation of 10 million can consider regime change on a tens of millions country. Now, you know, people always love to say this, like, oh, it's not representative of the people. I don't know. You know, it's one of those where it stood the test of time since the 1970s. Clearly,
you're talking about the Iranian government.
I mean, there's common cope in America to always be like, oh, the Venezuelan government doesn't represent the people or the Iranian people. And, you know, maybe, like, especially with all these elections. But as with all things, it's complicated. Are we going to say that they have no democratic support? Are we going to say that they have no representative of the people? And especially if you try and foist a new regime on them, how do you think that's going to go? You know, it's one of those
We've seen how it's gone in the past many times. Yeah.
So, you know, we have fantasies in America. Everybody's just like us. Oh, the Iraqis just want representative democracy. It's like, no, actually, you know, it's complicated. And especially when you put that into practice, they end up slaughtering each other. So it's one of those where, are we really better off, you know, replacing it? What do we know that comes next? Nobody knows. Nobody knows the answer to that question. We always talk about that with Russia. Oh, he's a dictator and all of that. The likely replacement for Putin would be somebody who is more aggressive and more dictatorial and warmongering, not the other way around. And this is a fantasy that clearly, you know, the Israelis, they're not stupid. They probably do know this. It's just one of those where they also know that at the end of the day, Big Brother America will come in to save their ass, and will ultimately, if we have to quote unquote save them, it will be with our own military force, our own ground forces that will get drawn into this, and we will be the ones sucked in for another 25 years. Iran would make Iraq look like a cakewalk, and Iraq was a disaster. You don't have to take my word for it. Take any war planner or others who have studied this. There's a reason that we never wanted to cross this red line for ourselves, despite the protestations of all of the neocons in Washington. But we are the closest that we've been to war with Iran, probably since 2009. I encourage people, there's an Atlantic article written in 2009, Jeffrey Goldberg, who wrote this entire profile of Bibi back then, saying to Obama, either you deal with the Iranian nuclear problem or I will, by striking and destroying their nuclear facility. I'm pointing that out to show you this is a multi-decade project by Bibi Netanyahu for regime change in Iran, and specifically to draw the U.S. into that conflict. It was only through the nuclear deal and others that we were able to avoid that. But we came this close, you know, to getting back into war that time, and not a lot of people remember. So it's terrifying. It really is.
Yeah, it absolutely is, especially when you look at, I mean, you've got a president who is addled, who knows how engaged he is or not. I'm not sure whether it would be better or worse if he was able and engaged, because his lockstep bear hug commitment to whatever Israel wants to do, specifically whatever Bibi Netanyahu wants to do. Ultimately, I might complain a little bit, but I'm going to back him up, has been an utter disaster. This is the one outcome that they have asserted from the beginning they wanted to avoid, and yet here we are. So you seem to have a few key individuals, Brett McGurk, perhaps chief among them, who have truly embraced the full neocon, let's install democracy around the world, let's spread democracy around the world view, who learned nothing from Iraq and other foreign misadventures. Because the reporting is that actually the U.S. wanted Israel, at least the White House, over the objections of the State Department and the Department of Defense, wanted Israel to go forward with escalating vis-a-vis Hezbollah, with invading Lebanon, thinking that now's the time when we can remake the Middle East. When have we heard that before? Mm-hmm. They think it's going to be different somehow this time around. And, with regard to the Iranians saying, hey, we think U.S. Oil assets and other strategic assets in the region are fair game, who can blame them for saying that we're an integral part of this? Of course we are. I mean, we're directly involved in the Israeli response to the Iranian attack. We've been sharing intelligence with them. We enable this entire situation. Saagar is 100% correct. If the Israelis knew they had to bear alone the cost of their continued provocations and escalations, there's no way that they continue in this direction. But they know that we will back them up no matter what. Joe Biden was asked about the potential targeting by Israel of Iranian nuclear sites. He seemed to be opposed to that. Let's take a listen to this exchange in front of Air Force One.
Sir, can I ask you, what is your support an attack on Iran's nuclear sites by Israel?
The answer is no. I think there's things. We'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all seven of us agree that they have a right to respond, that they should respond and enforce it.
So to be clear, for people who struggle to hear that, he was asked directly, does he support an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear sites? He says no. He goes on to say they have a right to respond, but they should respond proportionally. I mean, I play you this because he is the American president, but do his words matter at all? Doesn't seem to. Doesn't seem like they're willing to use any sort of leverage in order to enforce the direction that the U.S. wants things to go in, or at least that they pretend that they want to go in. So these words, even though they're important because they're the U.S. president, that's why I play them for you, they're also sort of irrelevant and meaningless given how incredibly impotent he is.
And you could go down that path and still get us into a war, which is, okay, fine, don't strike the nuclear site. You just take out a few oil refineries. Just a small little tap on the sole source of income for the Iranian regime. That's part of the problem, is that, even if you rule out something like the nuclear strike, it doesn't mean that even strikes in the middle of Tehran wouldn't itself invite major retaliation against the U.S. Not to mention, we have tens of thousands now of troops who are in the region, who are at risk from the Houthis, in Iraq, in Syria. I mean, all of these people are frankly just sitting ducks to any potential retaliation because of the Biden administration policy. And again, there has been this disgusting effort in America to just whitewash what happened with these Iranian missiles. There is no way that you can call it a failure. Let's put this up there on the screen. This is from the Times of Israel. This is, again, like a more right-leaning publication inside of the country, where even through military censorship, quote, they acknowledge that Iranian missiles hit some air bases. Now, they claim no major damage was caused. Maybe, release some photos, maybe, of the air bases that are okay. But the point is that if you only intercept a, quote, majority, and let's say you have a 30% hit rate, even 40%, that's a failure. Ask anybody who's studied or involved in missile defense. If you have 30 or 40% of these things that are coming through and that are precisely hitting military targets, including air bases, what does that tell you about the future? Iran has one of the largest ballistic missile stocks on Earth, and they're relatively cheap to manufacture. What you saw was only 200. They have thousands that they could fire, and those 200 were able to overwhelm the Arrow 3 system. So if there were thousands, do you have any doubt now that this would would not immediately cripple at least some of the IDF and of their Air Force. So this is the problem, is that we just believe our government and our idiot media. For example, in the VP debate, that's like, well, it was a failed attack. I'm like, what? Hold on a second. Just because it didn't kill anybody, or just because it didn't wipe every airbase on the planet, if it made impact on an airbase, I'm going to call that successful, especially in terms of establishing deterrence and establishing your ability to inflict damage if you want to. It's like any time, I don't know, in the past, like when America would strike Assad air bases and the Syrians would be like, oh, it was a failure because we were able to rebuild the airfield. I'm like, okay, but it did destroy the airfield. And the point is that the US military has the capability to do that if they want to. So if you're watching this just from a pure military view of the missile's ability to make contact with those air bases, you can't call it a failure. And yet, you know, how many people are gonna see this segment or read the follow-up news, which admits that bypassing military sensors that there was damage? Almost nobody. It's crazy.
You know, Glenn was opining on this on Twitter, as he does, and he made a point that I think is a disturbing but important one, which is basically like, because of the savagery with which Israel has conducted itself in Gaza and now in Lebanon, also in the West Bank, the view from the West is now like, oh, if you didn't murder a bunch of civilians and take out hospitals and schools and aid agencies, then it wasn't a success. And you know, you see that sentiment effectively on Twitter and other places, and I think that's basically correct. I mean, if they are downplaying the damage that was inflicted on military assets in the country in order to try to downplay the need for escalation, then I kind of support it. But I don't think that's what's going on here, because you don't see any of that in terms of the rhetoric. I mean, they're threatening regime change. They're threatening striking the nuclear facilities. They're saying basically like, we're cool if we go to all-out war, which of course Bibi has been cool with that for a very long time. So I don't think that that's the game that's being played here.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.